In this video, we'll identify key information about the graph of y equals negative 3x squared plus 6x plus 2. We'll then use this information to create a table of values and sketch the graph of this parabola. To start, we're asked to determine if this parabola opens upward or downward. And to determine this, we'll use the coefficient that we find on x squared. Here, the coefficient on x squared is a negative 3. Because that coefficient is negative, we know that this parabola opens downward. So we can state it opens downward. And in general, when dealing with quadratic equations in two variables such as this, that coefficient on x squared we'll refer to as a, and its value is negative 3. The coefficient on x is often denoted with b, and that's 6. And the constant there we denote as c, and that's just 2. So it opens downward as a is equal to negative 3, that coefficient on x squared. To find the vertex, we're going to use the property that the vertex occurs where x is equal to negative b over 2a. And this b and a are the same ones that I just referred to. They're going back to those coefficients. So negative b, since b is 6, a negative b is negative 6. I'm dividing by 2a, so I'm dividing by 2 times negative 3. So what I have here then is negative 6 over negative 6, which is simply positive 1. To find y, I'll evaluate that expression on the right for x equals 1. So to find y, I will evaluate for x equals 1. So I'll have y equal to negative 3 times 1 squared plus 6 times 1 plus 2. And negative 3 times 1 squared is simply negative 3. So I have negative 3 plus 6 plus 2, and that value is then 7. So I now know that the vertex is the point 1, 7. We'll now use this vertex to create a table of values. So remember that our equation is y equal to negative 3x squared plus 6x plus 2. And when we create this table of values, we're going to use that vertex so that that is where our center is and we can find points on either side. So I'll make a quick table. And I'll have x and I'll have y. And I know that the vertex occurs at 1, 7. I just found that. So 1 will be my middle x value here. And I'll pick 2 values on each side. So I'll do 2 and 3 to get 2 values on the right. And I'll go 0 and negative 1 to get 2 values on the left of it. I already found that the value of y when x is 1 is 7 when I found that vertex. I'm also going to star this value so that I remember it's the vertex and that I know from the axis of symmetry that I won't have to formally evaluate each of these. So let's start. Let's find the y value when x is 0. So if x is 0, what will y be? Y will be negative 3 times 0 squared plus 6 times 0 plus 2. And that simplifies just to 2. So we know that when x is 0, y is 2. And let's also calculate if x is negative 1. Let's find that y value. So if x is negative 1, then y is equal to negative 3 times negative 1 quantity squared plus 6 times negative 1 plus 2. When I take negative 3 times the number negative 1 squared, I get negative 3 times a positive 1. So I have negative 3 times positive 1 plus 6 times negative 1 plus 2. And that is simply negative 3 minus 6 plus 2, and that all simplifies to negative 7. So when x is negative 1, y is negative 7. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that we can use symmetry to determine further values. So because the vertex occurs at 1, 7, I know that this graph will have symmetry. So 1 unit to my left of x, I had a y value of 2, and so 1 unit to the right, I'll have the same y value. So I know that I'll have 2, 2 on that graph. And similarly, when x is 3, that y value is going to be the same as when x is negative 1, so that y value will be negative 7. Now we'll graph this equation. To start, I'm going to label my axes with an x and a y. and then I'll need to scale them. I have an 8 by 8 grid here, and so I can see from my y values that they'll need to go from -8 to +8. So I'll make each of those vertical tick marks worth 1 unit, and I'll mark off -4 and +4 as well. For the x values, I don't necessarily have to go from -8 to 8. The x values that I chose in my table are -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to make every 2 tick marks worth 1 unit, and I'll label this 8th tick mark on x as a 4, and then I'll label off 2 in the middle, and then I'll label -2 at that 4th tick mark to the left, and -4 at that 4th tick mark to the left. So now I'm ready to plot these points. I'm going to start with the vertex, which I know occurs at 1, 7. So I'll go where x is 1 and y is 7 and put a point on that graph. I know that this is the highest point on the graph because I initially identified that this parabola opens downward. Now I can plot 0, 2, so I'll go to where x is 0 and y is 2 and put a point. And I can do -1, -7, so I'll go to where x is -1 and y is -7 and put a point. And then using symmetry, I'll go to the other side and have the point 2, 2. And I'll also plot the point 3, -7. The last thing I want to do is connect these with a smooth curve. So I'll make sure it's rounded at that vertex and that it opens downward. Going through my points, and then making sure, of course, that I put arrows at the end, showing that it continues downward.